Nobody expected the little boy to calm the dog. Not the military trainers, not the doctors, and definitely not the veterans who had already watched three experienced handlers fail before lunchtime. The Belgian Malinois stayed locked inside the far kennel at the rehabilitation center outside San Antonio, pacing slowly across the concrete floor with one injured leg dragging behind him. His name was Viper, a combat dog pulled from active operations overseas after an explosion killed his handler during a nighttime raid 2 years earlier. Since returning home, the dog had become impossible to place. He snapped at trainers, ignored commands, refused physical contact, and reacted violently anytime someone tried fitting him with a working harness again. The military officially labeled him psychologically unfit for reassignment, which was just a professional way of saying the dog came home carrying too much grief. Most days, Viper sat silently near the back corner of the kennel, staring at walls nobody else understood. Then came the Thursday afternoon, when 8-year-old Noah wandered into the facility, holding his mother's hand. The boy wasn't supposed to be near the K-9 section at all. His mother volunteered twice a week helping wounded veterans through an outreach program connected to the rehabilitation center, and Noah usually spent those afternoons quietly reading books in the lobby or drawing pictures beside the coffee machine. He rarely spoke much to strangers. After losing his father in a car accident the year before, the child had become unusually quiet, almost careful with words, like talking too loudly might break something fragile inside him. That afternoon, while his mother worked upstairs with visiting veterans, Noah accidentally followed the wrong hallway and ended up near the secured kennel wing. The second Viper saw the boy, everything changed. The pacing stopped. The growling stopped. Even the trainers noticed it immediately. The injured combat dog slowly walked toward the kennel gate, ears raised, staring at the little boy with intense focus while everyone nearby froze in confusion. One handler quietly stepped forward, worried the Malinois might become aggressive, but Noah didn't seem afraid at all. He simply stood there looking at the scarred military dog for several long seconds before softly saying one strange word. Waiting. Nobody understood why the word mattered. But Viper reacted like he'd been struck. The dog froze completely. Then slowly, the old combat animal lowered himself onto the kennel floor directly in front of the child for the first time since returning from deployment. One trainer actually whispered, "That's impossible." Because according to rehabilitation records, Viper hadn't willingly approached another human being in almost 18 months. Noah stepped closer to the gate quietly while the dog watched him without aggression, without fear, almost like recognition existed between them somehow. Then the boy spoke again in the same soft voice. "My dad used to say that word too." The room went silent. Noah's mother arrived moments later, apologizing quickly after realizing where her son wandered, but nobody paid attention to her because all eyes remained fixed on Viper. The combat dog had moved all the way to the front of the kennel now, resting his head against the metal gate near the child's hand. One of the veterans standing nearby frowned. "Kid, what did your father do?" Noah looked down quietly before answering. "He worked with military dogs overseas." A strange heaviness settled across the room instantly. The trainers exchanged glances. Then one older Marine slowly stepped closer, staring carefully at the child. "What was your father's name, son?" Noah answered without hesitation. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter." The color drained from the Marine's face. Because suddenly the impossible reaction made horrifying sense. 2 years earlier, Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter died during the same overseas explosion that injured Viper and killed the dog's original handler. Military reports stated Carter helped pull wounded soldiers from the blast zone before disappearing during secondary fire. His body was never fully recovered. And according to deployment records, the last surviving thing Daniel Carter touched before the explosion was Viper's harness. The little boy looked back toward the dog again, confused by the silence around him. Then quietly asked the question that shattered every veteran standing there. Why does he look at me like he knows me? Nobody answered Noah's question right away because the men standing around the kennel were too busy trying to process what they were seeing. Viper, the same combat dog who had bitten through 2 training leashes and nearly attacked a transport handler 3 months earlier, now sat completely calm in front of an 8-year-old boy he had never met. The Malinois didn't just look relaxed either. He looked emotional. His ears lowered slightly. Tail moving once against the concrete floor, while he kept his eyes fixed on Noah like the child carried something familiar the dog had been searching for ever since returning from war. Noah slowly crouched near the kennel gate without fear, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, Viper gently pressed his nose through the bars toward another human being. One of the trainers quietly muttered, "I've never seen him do that." Noah's mother looked overwhelmed now, pulling her son slightly backward. "Maybe we should go," she whispered nervously, but the older Marine standing nearby shook his head slowly without taking his eyes off the dog. "No," he said softly, "let him stay." The Marine eventually introduced himself as Sergeant Luis Ortega, one of the soldiers who served beside Daniel Carter overseas during the operation that changed Viper forever. As the room settled into stunned silence, Ortega slowly explained what most people at the rehabilitation center never knew. Viper's original handler died instantly during the blast, but the dog survived long enough to stay active during the attack. Amid the chaos, Daniel Carter reportedly reached the injured Malinois while evacuating wounded soldiers under fire. According to surviving witnesses, Daniel used one repeated command while trying to calm the terrified combat dog during the explosion. "Oh, wait." The exact same word Noah spoke minutes earlier. Ortega looked toward the little boy quietly. "Your father used to say it differently than other handlers." Noah frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The Marine smiled faintly despite the emotion building in his eyes. "Most soldiers use commands like orders." He glanced toward Viper again. "Your dad said them like promises." Noah didn't fully understand the sentence, but Viper reacted immediately after hearing Daniel's name. The dog stood slowly and moved closer again until his forehead rested gently against the kennel gate beside the child's hand. Several trainers watched in disbelief because Viper usually became agitated anytime people discussed deployment memories near him. But around Noah, the combat dog seemed calmer with every passing minute. Then something even stranger happened. Noah quietly reached into his hoodie pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. "A few weeks ago I drew this," he said softly. His mother looked confused. "Noah, what is that?" The child unfolded the paper carefully and held it toward the kennel. Every person in the room froze. The drawing showed a soldier sitting beside a wounded military dog beneath falling dust and smoke. The soldier's face wasn't detailed clearly, but one thing stood out instantly. Around the dog's neck, Noah had drawn a damaged military harness with the name Viper written across the side. Ortega's face went pale. "How did you know that dog's name?" he whispered. Noah looked startled by the reaction. "I didn't." The room suddenly felt too quiet. Because Noah created the drawing nearly a month before ever visiting the rehabilitation center. His mother slowly sat down nearby, visibly shaken now. He's been drawing military dogs for almost a year, she admitted quietly. Always the same one. Ortega swallowed hard before looking back toward Viper. Your father used to send us pictures of you during deployment, he said softly to Noah. Every night before patrols, he'd show Viper your school photos. A sad smile crossed the Marine's face. That dog probably stared at your face more than some of the soldiers did. And suddenly, everything made heartbreaking sense. The way Viper looked at Noah. The calmness. The recognition. Somewhere inside the damaged memories carried home from war, the combat dog remembered the child connected to the last man who comforted him during the worst night of his life. Tears quietly filled Noah's mother's eyes while watching the old military dog lay peacefully beside her son. Then Ortega revealed the part nobody there expected. After the explosion, he said carefully, Viper refused to leave your father's side. Noah looked up slowly. The Marine's voice lowered almost to a whisper, even after Daniel died. Silence settled across the kennel wing. One trainer quietly turned away, wiping his eyes, while Noah looked back toward the Malinois with heartbreaking confusion. So he's sad too, Ortega nodded once. Yeah, buddy. His voice cracked slightly after that. He's sad too. Viper slowly closed his eyes as Noah gently rested one small hand against the kennel gate beside him. And for the first time since returning from combat, the injured military dog finally looked like he wasn't waiting for someone anymore. The rehabilitation center changed completely after that afternoon. Trainers who once avoided entering Viper's kennel without protective equipment now found the old combat dog calmly waiting near the gate every Thursday morning because he somehow learned Noah would arrive after school with his mother. Nobody at the facility could foo. Ellie explained the transformation. Around everyone else, Viper still remained distant and cautious, but the moment Noah entered the building, the injured Malinois became softer somehow, quieter, like the dog finally stopped carrying part of the fear trapped inside him since the explosion overseas. Sometimes Noah would sit outside the kennel reading comic books aloud, while Viper rested beside the gate listening silently. Other times the boy simply talked about school, cartoons, or memories of his father, while the dog watched him with those same intense eyes that once scanned combat zones for danger. The staff eventually stopped interrupting them because even the military psychologists admitted something remarkable was happening. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Viper was healing. One rainy afternoon near the beginning of winter, Sergeant Ortega arrived carrying an old military storage box recovered from overseas archives. He quietly placed it on the table beside Noah and his mother, while Viper immediately lifted his head from across the room after recognizing the Marine's scent. There's something your father wanted you to have someday, Ortega said softly. Inside the box rested deployment photographs, medals, handwritten notes, and one worn tactical leash attached to a faded military harness. Viper's harness. The moment Ortega placed it carefully on the floor, the old Malinois slowly approached for the first time without hesitation. Trainers held their breath watching the dog lower his nose toward the harness before gently laying beside it. Noah stared quietly at the military patches stitched into the fabric. Then he noticed something written in black marker along the inside strap. For Noah, when he's brave enough. The little boy looked up immediately. My dad wrote that. Ortega nodded. He used to say one day you'd understand why military dogs matter so much. Noah carefully touched the faded harness while emotion filled the room around him. Then, without anyone asking, Viper slowly pushed the leash toward the child with his nose. The trainers froze. Because military dogs only surrender working gear willingly to handlers they trust completely. Noah's mother covered her mouth trying not to cry, while the little boy picked up the leash with trembling hands. Viper stayed perfectly calm beside him, resting his head gently against Noah's knee afterward, like the decision had already been made long before anyone else realized it. 3 weeks later, the rehabilitation center approved something they once believed impossible. Viper officially left military care. Not with another combat trainer. Not with a security contractor. With Noah and his mother. The first night Viper entered their small house, the old Malinois walked slowly through every room, checking windows, hallways, and doors before finally stopping inside Noah's bedroom. The boy watched quietly from the doorway while the dog circled once beside the bed and laid down heavily against the carpet floor. "He likes it here," Noah whispered. His mother smiled softly through tears. "I think he already decided this was home." That night, for the first time since losing his father, Noah slept without nightmares. And for the first time since the explosion overseas, Viper slept through the night without waking up growling at shadows. Months passed after that. Winter faded into spring. Noah started laughing more again, talking more, living like a child instead of carrying grief too heavy for someone so young. Every morning before school, Viper walked him to the bus stop despite the injured leg slowing him down. Neighbors often watched quietly from windows as the old combat dog sat beside the curb waiting until the school bus disappeared completely before limping back home. But the moment everyone remembered forever happened during the school's Veterans Day assembly later that year. Parents filled the gymnasium, while children read essays honoring military families and fallen soldiers. Near the end of the ceremony, Noah walked slowly onto the stage holding Viper's leash, while whispers spread through the crowd immediately. Most people already knew the story of the wounded military dog and the little boy who somehow reached him when nobody else could. Noah stood nervously at the microphone for several seconds before finally speaking. "My dad used to say heroes don't always come home looking strong." The gym fell completely silent. The little boy gently rested one hand against Viper's head before continuing. "Sometimes they come home scared or hurt, and they just need someone who remembers them." Several veterans in the audience quietly lowered their heads after hearing that. Noah looked toward the old combat dog beside him and smiled softly. "Viper remembered my dad," he whispered, "so we decided to remember him too." By the time the assembly ended, even teachers were wiping tears from their faces. Years later, long after newspaper stories faded and military reco, RDS gathered dust inside storage boxes, people in that small Texas town still remembered the quiet boy and the injured combat dog who healed each other without ever needing many words. And every Veterans Day after that, Noah visited his father's grave with Viper walking slowly beside him, until the old Malinois eventually grew too weak with age to continue the trips. But even then, one thing never changed. Every time Noah whispered the word, "wait," the old military dog still looked at him exactly the same way he once looked at Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter overseas. Like loyalty could survive anything. Even wars. Even loss. Even time itself. Some heroes return carrying wounds nobody can see. Some children grow up missing people they barely had time to know. And sometimes, healing begins when two broken hearts finally recognize each other. If this story touched your heart, stay with us for the next journey, because love and loyalty never truly leave the ones they protect.